now. All right. I think we're recording. Cool. All right. Ibrahim, man, thanks for hopping on. I really appreciate you just you joining us. Look, for this is the first time that I'm recording and just having a conversation. I'm happy to share how this all got put together. And then Ibrahim, love for you to give a little background about yourself. Actually, maybe we should do that first. Ibrahim, I'd love to, if you can share more about what who you are, what you do, and I can set some context on how this even got set up.
Absolutely. Well, I'll give a quick Dun & Bradstreet. So, hi, everyone. My name is Ibrahim Jackson. Thank you, John, for having me. My role is really a people development leader. I am the founder of Ubiquitous Preferred Services, Inc., where our focus is really to upskill people for a changing world of work. And so that's what segues us into this conversation about emerging technology and, the impact it's going to have on your people going forward.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And I think it's cool is that, you actually reached out to me on LinkedIn just, randomly. I know that probably from one of the keywords in my profile, it's like, passionate about, Metaverse and things like that. And it's so cool just in general, right? With this, Metaverse community and Web3, like there's such a groundswell of just really cool people, I think, coming together and just sharing ideas and being willing to talk and have conversations, in every different capacity and every different angle. And your article was a really interesting one. So I read it, where I was like, wow, this is really cool. Let's have a conversation. We had a conversation. And I'm like, people have to hear, what you have to say. Because I think it's some really great ideas. And that's why we're having this recorded conversation. So, that's kind of how it's all got put together. So I think, look, with that, Web3 and Metaverse, right? It's just a really big topic. It's rapidly changing. It feels like it changes every day. There was a point where I was trying to keep up with different projects and cryptocurrencies and writing them down on, paper and keeping them in Google Docs. And then at some point, it just exploded like astronomically. And I'm like, I'm overwhelmed. I can't do it anymore. Right. So now I just focus on what's cool. But, I guess what in the space has your most attention at this point? I'd love to kind of hear that. And if you could share it with folks.
No, absolutely. I would say my primary interest in Web 3.0 is really around, I'll say it's actually called spatial computing, but we'll use today's marketing term of Metaverse. That really has my attention right now. I'm probably a little over leveraged in crypto right now, or at least if you look at the market today. Hopefully by the time people watch this video, it will be in a different space, but just loving the journey anyway. As well as just looking at some of the other things around NFTs. So those are really the top three, but it's really about the metaverse. And I'm mindful of what's happening in today's society in the physical world and seeing how our behaviors and activities are now migrating into the metaverse. And so my focus is really around how do we create this space around diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I have a proprietary frame, not even a proprietary framework, but a framework that I use that really looks at diversity as the people, inclusion as the communities that those people are a part of, and then belonging being really the culture that you look to foster. And people always ask me, why don't you say equity? Because I feel equity is woven through all of those things. Are we giving the people the right access to and fair opportunities? Are we also allowing them to be a part and included in specific initiatives that are happening there? And then are we really creating that sense of belonging for all of those communities, both internally and externally to the organization? And so when I look at the metaverse, I always think about, okay, this is great. We're having a great time and we're in these alt spaces, right? And having these sorts of communities, what are the great behaviors? And then it's like, ooh, I start to cringe when I hear about some of the poor behaviors that are happening. And then what can we do to help mitigate that?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? There was a couple of weeks back where not every, but a lot of journalists, especially women journalists, were coming out on big publications being like, yeah, I checked out Horizons on Meta, on the Oculus, and I got harassed. And then you read another article and it's the same thing. It's yeah, I was just getting harassed. And you have these these kids screaming in my ear. And I'm like, okay, well, how do you, eventually get through some of that? And that's not the only place it's happening, right? It's happening in a lot of other platforms, not just on Horizons. So I guess from your perspective, I guess, what are you thinking on? Are you having thoughts on hey, how do we help start solving this problem? Of just general harassment and just an inclusion in a way that allows everybody to access the metaverse in a way that is comfortable for everybody.
Well, yeah, and I think that's where the rub is, right? Because it's what's comfortable for you. Typically, often we have that the golden rule mental model: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Which the reality is, not everyone wants to be treated the same, right? So we need to establish a platinum bridge where we do unto others as they would like us to treat them. And so when we think about the metaverse, just like traditional internet, there will be things that you're into that I am not into, right? And that can be music, right? Not necessarily everyone's going to jump into a hip hop concert, right? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have the concert there, right? We loved the halftime show. And the same thing. It's just that, look, there will be bikini beach parties that are happening here that some people want to be a part of, and then for families, when you have your children, I don't want my children there. Just like I wouldn't bring them to Las Vegas, right? So we have to just think about those experiences and be mindful. And similar to when we were addressing biases within AI, I think we need to start thinking about what are some of the biases that will be embedded into the metaverse, and how we put in controls, and I'm saying that with a few quotes, controls in place to hopefully mitigate some of the risks that may come with it. Because we don't want, companies like MS, who had to shut down components of their alt space, to happen too frequently. So, those are the things that are beginning to come to mind.
Now, are you familiar with any projects or initiatives taking place right now to address some of that? I'm just out of curiosity. I mean,
I have not explored and researched them, but it's top of mind, and I'm sure there are communities out there we should probably explore.
Yeah, man, it's there's so much. There's so much, right? I mean, I think, and it's interesting too to think like there's so many different angles of helping society and hurting society, and I guess like that's a topic in and of itself, right? It's like in the immediate term, how do you think in 2022, this addresses a lot of what you were just sharing, and then I think how do you think it changes 10 years from now, right? Like into the future, and from like a diversity and inclusion perspective as well.
Yeah. So, well, the way that I think about it now is, so from on the positive side, I would say that when we think about cultural competency, this creates a space for us to say, how do we interact with people who are different from us, right? Because in the metaverse, the reality is you're an avatar, right? So I could show up as someone who I am not and get to learn about, someone who has a facade right now. It's not actually authentic. However, we could learn from someone who just says, okay, well, you know what? I identify differently than I actually show up in the physical world, right? So you get an opportunity to, build empathy, sympathy, compassion for social identities that you may not typically interact with. And I think that's very important, especially for individuals who have been in a homogenous environment for long periods of time. It's like, listen, this is what I know and this is what works best. But as we migrate to more of a heterogeneous environment, we'll want to make sure that we're bringing people in. We will want to make sure that we're sensitive to nuances that we may not be familiar with. And so while we're in the metaverse, we have an opportunity to experiment. It's almost like, in the advanced manufacturing world, it is the digital twin, right? How do we create these digital twins? And I think you do the same thing with people. So I think there's a great opportunity for that. When we think about today, I think future forward, there's some exciting things happening where I'm looking at trends of how even wardrobes in the metaverse are now being printed, or not printed, or created as physical products in the real world, right? So I'll share with you some research on that. I don't have the link readily available, but that I think is really cool in terms of how we'll begin to do commerce, right? Because we'll be in the metaverse. We can't exchange physical cash. I don't think we'll want to use traditional credit cards. And so that's where our crypto starts to come in. Those are the exciting things. In the future, some of the areas where we'll need to be concerned with are just some of your modern day threats, I think, when we start allowing children to get into certain spaces in the metaverse. That's an area of concern for me right now. Especially, my son, he's 11 and he's a gamer, and he's a hardcore gamer, streamer, all that stuff. I'm always mindful of, okay, do we need to make sure that we're protecting those personas and archetypes there. So that's what I'm thinking about in terms of the future, as well as I think I'm sorry, the one thing I left out in terms of really great space is those with accessibility issues. And what I like to say are, I don't say disability, I say unique abilities. Those with unique abilities, I think this gives them a space where they're able to also take advantage of just some of those virtual worlds. So really, really important things that I'm passionate about.
Thanks for sharing that. It's there's so many things you said that I'm taking notes, trying to make sure I don't forget, kind of some responses there. But the thing about the children, it was one that actually is something that struck me, because I have, young children as well that are all under 11. And it's interesting because I was reading comments on, I think it was like Horizon World or something on the Oculus, and I was reading all the comments about what people were saying about, about that, because it has a relatively, like, not a great, like, 5-star review. It's, I think it's like less than 4 or something last time I checked. And I was wondering, like, what are people saying about just the Horizon experience, right? Like, once you're in the Oculus. And one woman wrote this very lengthy thing, and she was like, look, she's like, I joined, and next thing I know, it sounds like I have like a 7-year-old kid or a 6-year-old, boy coming up to me and like wanting to talk. And she's like, okay. And then he's like asking to be friends, and he's like asking for, like, information. And she's like, I felt really uncomfortable. She's like, but that's me. Like, there's other people that have, different objectives by going into the space that are not, kind of, upstanding. And it made me realize, it's like, Facebook or Meta or whatever can say, or any platform owner can say, look, this isn't for kids, right? You have to be whatever, 13 years or older or 18 years or older to use this platform. But you and I both know, just like logging onto a website and that pop-up says, how old are you? Put your birth date in. If you're going to use that as your security measure, like, we have some major problems, and that's what's happening. Like, right, you can't say that kids aren't allowed to use this. Kids are going to use it, right? So Facebook, Microsoft, all the big companies, they need to really get better at identifying when there is a minor or a child using this platform and how to address that, right?
They will. They will. The reality is they will, because it will increase market share, right? Because to them, it's good business. It adds another footprint. And again, this happened with the internet, right? When there were sites that weren't necessarily child appropriate, controls got in place, and it spawned new markets, right? That's how McAfee and Norton and all of these guys ended up with, these filters. And I don't know if we can mention product names here, but it spawned new businesses for them. So I know that they will get there. It's just when. At the same time, I don't think that we should not allow our children to utilize these capabilities, because, again, it is proven that spending time in the metaverse, virtual reality, etc., it boosts creativity. So I will send you the link on that. It boosts creativity. So that's why I really like the idea of, yes, let children use it, but as parents and guardians, we need to make sure that we're just monitoring, like hyper monitoring what they're doing.
Absolutely.
But they'll get there. I mean, listen, even adults, we're checking boxes and saying, yes, we'll do this. And of course, allow cookies, and we don't care about GDPR and all, right? We do it as adults as well, right? Yeah, don't know what we're getting ourselves into. In terms of the undesirable behavior that you were talking about, I believe, just like the 6-year-olds walking up to the woman who's a bit older, it may not actually be a 6-year-old. Right? It could be the similar scenarios we have with scammers, whether it's, here's an spam email, or, hey, would you like warranty insurance over the phone? And they're really just trying to get your personal information. So,
right, you're absolutely right. Yeah, but you talked about perspective earlier. I think, one of the, and we were talking about this before we clicked record, is that, there's a really cool experience on the Oculus called Goliath. And what it is you get in there, and it's more of like an entertainment. So you're not really doing much, but you're more watching and being exposed. And it puts you in the shoes of somebody who has psychosis. And it's really neat because, most people who don't have psychosis can't really feel what it's like to have psychosis. And that they've done a really nice job kind of making you feel like what it's like to kind of be in the mind of someone like that. And I imagine, and you mentioned one, if you want to share it, I think it's really cool, because I'm going to get onto this kick now and actually start experiencing more of these other, get into someone's shoes experiences, because it really impacted me, right? I want to do more of that. Yeah.
It does. I mean, if you and I'll go into it, but the reality is this: we're human beings, right? And so, we start from the ground level of pity whenever we see something that's not right, right? It's sort of pity, and then you have sympathy, which is more mental, right? I understand, but then the empathy piece is, can I feel exactly what you're feeling because I've actually walked in your shoes? And to your point, someone who suffers from psychosis, et cetera, if you don't have that, you really don't know. You can't walk in their shoes. And even just to go sort of surface level, as an individual who may not have the same social identity as another person, you can never really say, I've like walked in your shoes and understand it. And so I think what the metaverse brings to the table is that you are able to build up empathy and even stronger compassion when you're able to be in someone's shoes. So the experience you were referring to comes out of Stanford, which is, I believe, called Journey of 1,000 Cuts. And it actually takes you through the journey of a young Black boy, right, from the time that they're in school and in preschool all the way through their life. And it actually highlights areas of privilege as well when he gets to being a more of a teenager. And he and his white best friend are getting ready to go outside and do some things around playing basketball, but there's been a crime committed in the neighborhood. And so it's really good. I would suggest checking it out. It comes out of Stanford. Jeremy, I can't remember his last name, who's the professor over there at that school. He does a really good job of just managing that particular virtual experience. But to close out, what's really good about walking in people's shoes is that it helps with empathy training. And just think, when you have hiring managers in organizations and they're really, like, listen, we want diversity, we want inclusion, et cetera. And they're interviewing and you're seeing people are getting into the pipeline, but they're somehow just falling off. Part of it is, are we actually helping folks to be culturally competent enough to say, okay, you know what, I've actually had a blind spot and didn't realize that what I've been looking at as a weakness is a potential strength because it's a uniqueness that can be brought into our organization.
Yeah, I could imagine there's going to be a future where certain HR managers are maybe included or instructed to throw on the headset and to go a certain type of training.
It needs to be required training. I mean, I actually received something in from the city today because they're asking if I can help with consulting around, let's just say, virtual training to protect our interests. Right? And so that is exactly, where this is headed. How do we make this required training where your cultural competency training isn't you doing a multiple choice test or whatever and say, okay, now we're compliant, and I'm out of here. It's more of let you walk in the shoes and see how your behaviors may be perceived on the other end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So
I know we only got a few minutes left, but one last question for you for thought. So like the space changes, every day. And you just said something to me that I haven't heard of yet, where you take the NFTs and now you're like almost 3D printing them in the real world. Are there any other cool or interesting ideas that you think people haven't heard of that you might be aware of that you want to share?
So, cool ideas. Well, what I would say, you have that. You also have what I'm really excited about is the DFS, I believe it is, for the distributed file system. Yeah. We've been doing it with airdrops and all of those things today, but I think once we get 5G the way that it needs to be, and even I'm not sure what the status is with Li-Fi. I don't know if you've been looking into Li-Fi, where it's the light frequency to actually get things, even faster internet. Once we get that sort of speed, once we get quantum computing running the way that it needs to be, I think there's just going to be a world of just nuance that we'll really be excited about. So that was pretty much a long-winded way of saying I have to think about it a bit more, but there are so many capabilities that are coming to market that really the world is our oyster, and hopefully we're going to use it for good. I mean, we know that there will be bad out there, but let's use it for good.
That's right. Well, look, this was a great conversation. I'm going to drop some of those links, definitely get some of those links from you that you mentioned, and I'll drop it into the notes along with the video. But anything else before we sign off?
I just want to say, John, thank you for making me your first session. It's been really great and delightful, and yeah, I look forward to the future of having more of these conversations, both recorded as well as offline.
Awesome. Awesome. Me too, man. All right, I'm gonna hit stop. Let's see, stop record.